and I'll go straight into the agenda. Okay, welcome everyone to the Community Governance Oversight Fund 8 dRep White Paper Working Group meeting. Thank you for coming. And the first item on the agenda is a brief background on the proposal. It was funded in Fund 8, successfully voted for, and to keep it very short, it was tasked to examine changes or oversight of Project Catalyst governance, and then challenge setting, Catalyst circle problem sensing, parameter changes, and lastly, what we're doing here, dReps. And our planned schedule is between the 1st of June, which is we've already started, until I'm supposed to end on the 30th of September, at which time the idea is to contribute to a final overall report, which we'll present at Town Hall. Kenric, we'd like to say a few words about that before we move
on. Yes, so welcome everyone. And, so in the last Fund 7 portion of this, we completed a literature review, and now we're moving forward with a white paper. And the basic way that the team is structured is there's 3 roles that are planned. So Steve, myself, and Thorsten are going to act as editors of the white paper. And then there's 4 or 5 people who have stepped up to be a lead author for a section of the white paper. And then once we're further along, I plan to have some community input regarding a review of the paper before we finalize it. And we'll talk more about the structure of that as we go further in the meeting. But I think what Steve had next on his agenda is for each of us to just give a check-in on how we're doing.
So Phiip's joined us. Welcome, Phiip. And we just did a brief overview of what the proposal's about, and then we're just now on to introductions. So I did this in alphabetical order, but there's no strict rule. There's no pressure at all. Just say a few words and maybe break the ice, introduce yourself. So Aharon, I'll take it over to you first, but
So you expect to start introducing? By the list, I see.
Yes, if you could just say a few words.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, of course. So I came for this meeting as the founder of Consenz, and another funded proposal from the project Catalyst. During Fund 8, we have submitted and been approved by a proposal for creating research for the Accelerated Digital Identity Challenge, for building different framework for voting, for governance and voting. We named this proposal Democracy on the Blockchain. And I think that while we are here speaking about the dRep role and how we can implement liquid democracy into this role, we are also working with the CA and the BCA communities in order to provide them a tool for creating guidelines. And we are starting researching how we can use the digital identity technology in order to create a variety of voting influence and voting mechanism toward our platform. So while right now the main voting in Cardano as a whole, the main role of voting is on proposals on the use of the treasury. We hope that after our MVP, after the first version of Consenz platform will be ready, we can use it. We can use it in order to explore different kind of influence and governance, like creating documents that can act as the code of conduct or constitution. And by integrating those principles of the liquid democracy and other systems, we can experience and really see how this voting mechanism work in real use before we can implement them on the catalyst process and on the treasury use.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Aharon.
So, and if we could move on to Frank. sorry to be, this was moved me to a lot.
We
have lots of opportunities to expand on our backgrounds a lot more, so we can keep it a little bit brief. Yeah. Sorry, Frank. Yeah.
No, I look forward to learning further. That's fascinating topics mentioned from Aaron there. Yeah, you guys, I'm Frank Albanese, currently CSO at Snapbrillia. We had 2 proposals we put forth in F8 around our mentor-mentee bounty network, similar to Gitcoin, but for Cardano, and then our quadratic voting and funding research. We're building that Cardano native, so we have a Haskell Plutus team of around 25 engineers right now. And we're working through architecting systems that help with Sybil attack defense mechanisms baked in on like the hyper technical level, and then lending that self eventually to what we're doing with SSI research, which is we're hopefully providing users a proof of reputation platform, starting with Hyperledger Aries integration. We have an Occupy instance running, and then with Atala Prism, we're working alongside the Roots wallet and Roots ID teams, and Tony Rose and the team from IOG around Prism. Really, what I'm curious about is, I'd love to document the way we're looking at like the UTXO model and how that actually, and Kenric was on our call only an hour ago, but we were just talking about, ways in which there are some attack vectors that are exposed through having a hyperlocal state, like with the UTXO model. And the way you accomplish like a local global state with either like a dyad NFT where there's an issuer and holder model, or there's this SSI approach with like a CL credential informing a voting record, and how that can be expanded upon.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
sorry.
We're going to dive into these things.
Cameron's calling time here.
This is supposed to be, we're just intending this to be casual introductions of each other. So, but I'll go next.
Sure.
George is away right now. So I'm the founder of Photrek. We've been providing a variety of different insights about how complex systems can help understand governance processes within the Catalyst community. And then Photrek has complementary efforts in machine intelligence and then also in environmental science sensors. And really looking forward to working with you all. It's been a pleasure working with Steve, and I think this is going to be an exciting effort.
Okay, thank you, Cameron. If we could move on to Phiip Lazos of IOG.
Hello, I'm a research fellow at IOG. I used to work as a researcher in academia, doing all sorts of things with mostly theoretical computer science, games, auctions, incentives, and the like. And the last year or so, I've been working full-time at IOG, working on the research side on a variety of projects involving consensus or incentives, things like that. Thank you.
Okay,
thanks, Philip. Great to have you with us.
It's great to have you. Say that again. Okay, Steph may be joining us later from Wolfram. So in place of Steph, or I'll just give a brief background for myself. My name is Stephen Whitenstall. I got funded for a proposal in Fund 5 for something called QADAO. I have 30 years experience in quality assurance background, test program management, project management, social enterprise. Most recently, I have a degree in philosophy. Became interested in Catalyst from that perspective, and really do a lot of project management on governance projects in Catalyst, in several governance projects, and also quite well known for documentation. So what you're talking about, Frank, in terms of how to communicate technical subjects in a way that is easily understandable, and also to help onboard people and to understand the risks and the quality issues involved with that. So thank you. Looking quite exciting group of people here, and if we could hear from Thorsten.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, I've been part of Catalyst since last year, and have been involved in a number of topics. Lately working with Stephen on audit topics and also on governance topics. Was also part of the team who did the literature review. And in my day-to-day life, I'm working as an audit program manager for an international medtech company. So I have a postgraduate degree in computer system security.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. If we move now on to the outlines for the white paper, I pasted in some sections here from the actual white paper itself, if that was useful, Kenric, and I'll hand it over to you now as well.
Okay, yeah, and I think I'll just go ahead and share my screen at this point.
Okay, I'll do.
And I'll also note, I think
I might have to stop my share and then hand over to you.
Okay.
So
yeah,
so
that'll be easier.
if I make you a co-host, then you should be able to.
It looks like it's all set.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Great.
Yep, I see it here. Let's see, Frank, I just added you to this paper, so I think you have an email now with a link to it. And I will, after the meeting, also add you to our Zotero bibliography database. That was part of the work we did in the last section.
Yep, sounds good.
And as I mentioned, the way we're organizing the team is that myself, Thorsten, and Stephen will act as editors of the whole white paper. And then each of you right now is kind of, I'm thinking of each of you leading a section. Now, there are some natural synergies. And so as we go forward, we may change the arrangement a little bit. But there also can be some overlap in terms of how we work together. Right now, the white paper has an introduction that was written during our literature review. So for the moment, I'm keeping that, but that's likely to change. And it includes a little diagram of what liquid democracy is. And of course, the reason we're focused on this is kind of the foundation for what is proposed as the delegated representative process for Catalyst. And we're viewing our mission as to identify what measurements need to be done on an ongoing basis to understand the integrity, the dynamics, and the quality of the community's representation in this manner. And a significant part of our work has been getting a deeper understanding of what's called the Banzhaf power index. This is a way of measuring the probability that an individual in a voting system has the ability to change the outcome of a decision. And it's a kind of combinatorial analysis about how often you are a decisive voter versus someone who's not influential in the outcome. And the two extremes of that are, if your probability is 0, that means that you're what's called a dummy vote, and you're not actually influencing any of the decisions. And then the other extreme is if the probability is 1, then you're a dictator and you're actually making the choice for the community about all of the decisions. There are a lot of other issues as well, and many of you will be digging into them. Let's get started with that by looking at the draft outline that I put together. I'm looking for your input on this, and while sort of putting my own thoughts here kind of biases it, feel free to completely delete the title I put next to your name and, put something more appropriate there. But just to kind of get the thought process and the discussion going, let me go through this quickly, and then let's step back through each one and talk about it a little bit. So Steph Macurdy worked with me on understanding this paper about Banzhaf voting power in delegated rep voting systems. And he's also identified some Wolfram tools that are already built to do this measurement. So he's already getting started on this. And then Phiip, yours was maybe the most difficult for me to identify a title. So I think you particularly need to work on this. But I made it just very broad. And of course, Phil is the co-author in a very important paper that IOG published at the beginning of the year on blockchain governance and overviewing lots of different systems. And then with yours, Aaron, I've kind of built on the work you're doing in forming consensus regarding governance documentation. But again, free to find that. So the editors may be co-authors in some of the sections if they're planning to dig into a particular section and contribute writing to it. And with a couple of you, we've already kind of had discussions around you know, contributing to a section to this, but then also working together to build from that and put an independent white paper together on that topic. So Aaron is one case of that. And I'll come back to Georgia since he's not here, and that's still a little bit vague in terms of how it's defined. And the final one is Frank and the Snapbrillia team are particularly interested in identity security that's required for blockchain governance, particularly because once you move beyond one coin, one vote, you require security about the identity of who's voting. And so where they're building a quadratic voting funding system, this issue about preventing civil attacks is quite important. And again, this is another situation where Frank is joining to lead a section, and then I'll be working with his team to actually expand upon that for an independent white paper as well. And so let's see, Steph's not here, so maybe we'll start with Phillips.
I'm here.
Oh, you are, great. Did you just join us, Steph?
Yeah, sorry for being late.
You know what, I'll let you get kind of acclimated. We're going over the outline, and why don't I start with Phil's section? How much have you thought about where you want to direct your efforts on this white paper, Phil?
So it all depends on how much available time I'm going to have and how long this section will be. So given the title, I can think of a few things to say of the order of a couple pages explaining why like delegated representation is useful, particularly for Project Catalyst, but this is basically abstract enough to be applied to, you know, to many settings that face similar challenges. Right. So something of this sort of length and at a high level, I think is possible.
That's
but I don't know how much we want to expand and what the scope of it should be.
Yeah, so I do want to be sensitive to this being of limited scope. So we can always do more in another funding round if there's community interest and support for that. But as you described, if you can write 2 to 3 pages, and the only thing I would say is if I go back, I was particularly sensitive to this in the first article, but if we go back to the original title, Delegated Representation in Cardano's Catalyst Governance, and actually I think I'm going to add a subtitle here because what I'm trying to emphasize, where I think the proper focus is what aspects of delegated representation needs to be measured so that the community has some understanding about how well the process is actually working.
Mhm.
So I don't want, the introduction, of course, can be descriptive of delegated representation, but I want to get a little bit beyond just being descriptive. And I also would like your title to try to think about, for instance, if Steph's going to fund voting power, what's another property of delegated representation that needs to be measured in order to assure quality and integrity in the process?
Okay.
And for instance, that might come from some of your experience and knowledge in game theory or some other aspect of your work in governance systems.
I think something that could possibly make sense as a section would be to explain the pros and cons of delegated voting and liquid democracy. Like there's a bunch of papers in the literature review that paint a negative picture of it, but this is under a very specific lens. And I could go into what the sort of most current literature is, how this might apply to Project Catalyst, why it probably doesn't, and what we hope would be a way to show that this actually increases the sort of the relative power of the smaller stakeholders rather than the opposite, which is the claimed result in some settings.
Just picking up on Philip's point more generally, if we, Kenric, if we take the whole thing as like a collection of different papers, are we saying then 2 to 3 pages? So in terms of just fulfilling people's expectations here, and then I know we need to go back to just sort of like exploring what that might, in summary, look like. But then as we go through a series of meetings, do we return each meeting to review our progress on the papers, or do we review whether at the next meeting, for example, that level of detail is required, or we want to drop papers, that kind of thing?
Well, the way I'm thinking about it is the following. Like Philip described, each section should be, let me expand a little bit, somewhere between 2 to 5 pages, depending on the scope that someone wants to dig into this. And, in a way, also let's accept too that each lead author is bringing a capability to the table, both from their personal experience and the company that they represent. Now, as we flesh these out, I also see the possibility of, and I don't think it's necessarily a good idea for one person to just write this section by themselves. They will have editorial support for sure. There will be reviewers at a later stage, but there might also be some overlap, right? So for instance, both Steph and Philip are coming at this from the point of view of what kind of game theory or statistical analysis can we bring to understanding how delegated representation works and what its pros and cons are. So they may very well decide to kind of team up and be co-authors on each of their chapters. And so it's fine to form teams. I do think if we can, I'll also accept that some people may end up not having the scope to lead a chapter. We'll have to adapt to that too. But I'm hopeful we can have 4 to 5 of these sections.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Steve?
Yeah, that's great. I'll just also to you know, so it's clear to everyone here expectations as we go forward. And but yeah, but it's very helpful to what you're doing now, Kenric, in terms of looking at each subject area, and then, you know, having some maybe initial thoughts on the headlines for each one. So that's great.
Right. Okay, so let me go to Aaron next, and then I'll come back to Steph. So Aaron, maybe you can describe, you know, what your own. Now, one thing I would emphasize, Aaron, is that this particular white paper is focused on the delegated representation. You obviously have broader interests in terms of what consensus is trying to achieve. But this part, you know, for this part of the task, will be focused on things that contribute to an understanding of delegated representation. So within that context, can you describe some of the things that are of interest to you that you plan to dig into?
Yeah, I think, can I share my screen? Maybe I can show you some sketches that I made. It's very preliminary, but maybe it can give you some idea of where Consenz can fit in to this effort. Do you see the sketch? I'm not sure.
Yes.
Okay, so I've been thinking, because Consenz is a agreement building platform, and agreement in this case is a document, so we can divide those governance document to different classification, and I try to think which voting method, which governance method is the most suitable for the different level, the different classification. And as you can see, I can, for the low level maybe, or then one vote maybe is more suitable. But for the mid and high level, I can consider more direct democracy, and liquid and representative democracy can be more applicable. So maybe if I will focus on those kind of agreement, of document, in this in the chapters that we will write for this white paper, to give some very high, very general overview of different kind of governance focus that needs or require the representative voting or representative governance. Then our effort, our general research will be focused on the need of this specific white paper. Does this answer your question? You're muted.
You're muted, Kenric.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. This is very helpful to have a diagram like this. And if I can just kind of recap, what you're describing is you have kind of different levels of agreement that have to be made in your own process. And you're thinking that the high level agreements are perhaps the ones that have the most similarity with the Catalyst delegated representation process. Yeah. Is that fair?
Yeah, just to emphasize, it's like a suggested process for all DAOs, including in Catalyst in this case, yeah, that Consenz can provide. So and yes, this is how I think Consenz can be work.
Yeah, and maybe one way.
So could I just
I'll pause. Let someone.
If I could just ask a scoping question, Aaron.
Yeah.
Would you say that this would represent a paper, perhaps to complement, because it needs to be relevant to dReps. Let's say we roll out dReps, then this would be a proposal of how to document, or a suggested way that how we document dReps, or are you proposing to use this procedure to document our white paper, the papers in our white paper? What do you have in mind? So,
I think a third option, how dRep will participate in governance that is outside of the scope of funding.
Okay.
So this is what I thought about, but it can. I hope it can support the options that you presented as well.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just trying to open it up and explore what you're saying. It's quite interesting, So back to you, Kenric. Sorry.
Yeah, so maybe for instance, the focus here would be applications of delegated representation beyond proposal funding. So you want to take some time, Aaron, to think about a good title and a good and a good outline for your section. And as I say, the constraint is to make sure that your section fits within the focus of the whole overall white paper about how we're going to measure the properties of delegated representation. And, so for instance, one measurement could be, what forms of governance does it facilitate? And so one function of governance is to produce reliable documents, right, that people trust and people feel they had a voice in forming.
Yeah. I think the way that you frame it is just about
in fact, I'm going to add this. I had this we did this last time, but we had brainstormings about inputs and outputs. So I'm going to add this as an output is like sort of ability to generate consensus documents, such as a constitution or guidelines.
But if I'm recording, could you share your screen again, Kenric, on the?
Oh, okay, yeah.
It just helps from a kind of viewability point of view.
Absolutely. Let me do that. I'm going to get back to this. All right. And I will also go back to Steph to talk about, and here again, Steph, since you weren't here, I've given you a working title, but I want you to change this. I want you to make it your own. But just to facilitate today's discussion, I wanted to get started. So the working title here is Measuring Voting Power in a Delegated Representative Process. And as you describe, what you plan to work on, I'm going to take some notes.
Yeah, well, so when doing my own research on the Banzhaf index, which is, I guess, the major index, there's a Shapley index, which I haven't looked much into as well, but Banzhaf index is what we want to begin with in terms of measuring voting power within Catalyst. And in my research, I came across a kind of demonstration and a visualization for the Banzhaf index and calculating it inside Wolfram language. And so I met with the author along with Kenric and talked it out, and he's been working on some function that if we feed in what we know we want to feed in from Catalyst into this function, it should just spit out Banzhaf power indexes for either specific entities or something else. So I think what the work now is for me is to figure out and just query the group, like how do you fit what's happening in Catalyst into into this function in order to spit out what the rankings are and then make sense of it. So I'm meeting with him again next week, and I'd be happy to explain the process of making the Banzhaf index a bit more hands-on and workable.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that, you know, this is all kind of just, I think what I really need help on is how do we fit what's happening in Catalyst into structuring it so that we can query the Banzhaf index, you know, because I think originally some of these things were created to look at like a US presidential election. But that's not, you know, there are different functionalities, and I don't know if we have all of the data and stuff like that.
Yeah, so this is going to be a great contribution, Steph. I'm really excited about what you've uncovered. And what I meant to say to you too is that, and ping me if I don't do this in the next day or two, I want to get the data that I have to you and your colleague, because
is it
for
the
this
fund? Is
round-
it the Fund 5 stuff? Fund
Yes.
5 or something? I think
Yes.
I think you did send it. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Okay, good.
yeah.
So, yeah, all right, great. All right. So,
So from that,
my suggestion is that if you can do sort of a post analysis of, I know there's data for Fund 4 and 5, and that's probably the most relevant. I think there's also some data for Fund 3, but that one's a little bit tougher because of there were some unusual things that happened in that round. But if we focus on Fund 4 and 5, and you're able to provide analysis about the Banzhaf index for that round, that's going to be a fantastic input to the kind of things that are needed, and we'll need to adapt in order to be able to measure this in a delegated representative process, which is going to be more difficult. And again, this is sort of managing scope. You know, for this round, what we want to do is identify what measurements need to be done, and then provide supporting evidence of why that would be a valuable measurement. You know, so if the supporting evidence is actually a measure of round 4 and 5 of Catalyst, that'll be fantastic.
yeah. So in the data that we already have, it's the wallet, it's the number of wallets and the amount of voting power of those wallets, correct? That you have,
Yes.
Kenric?
Yes.
And so,
and then we also, there's this, yeah, that's the most important thing. And then we also have, separate from that, the actual outcomes.
right.
And so you know, for instance, there might be ways to compare. You know, what the Banzhaf index kind of does is it gives you the combinatorial analysis of all the possible outcomes. And as your colleague discussed, we're going to have to scope that down a little bit. But then we can kind of compare that with what actually happened in those rounds as part of the analysis too.
And does that, so yeah, there's like some simplification that has to happen. But then let's say we do have all of a specific wallet's votes in Fund 8 or Fund 9 round. You know,
yeah, I will say, and this is where you might want to reach out to in our, not have what each wallet voted on. So we have the wallet distributions in terms of the amount of data that was in each wallet. And we also have the outcomes of the elections.
but we don't have
the map
right.
of what each wallet voted on.
Right. And
But it's
so,
not, at least for Funds 4 and 5, that data is actually publicly available. It's just a little bit challenging to organize. And whether it's within scope for someone to take that on is kind of the question.
Can you remind me when votes happen in Catalyst, it's occurring on a side chain or a test net? Where are those votes
going? What I
going?
want to do is we're already at quarter of, so that's a great question, but I'm going to reserve that for a side discussion.
Okay.
On that project.
Okay.
And I'm going to move next to Frank's work with Snapbrillia regarding identity security and alternative voting structures.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the ideas being shared here. I will add that our team, if you need assistance with querying, a testnet, we're pretty proficient now in Black Frost, and we're consuming Dandelion's solution through Gimbal Labs for querying this kind of data. So, happy to collaborate on the technical side there with the information gathering, if need be. I think,
thanks.
Yeah, the way I view this section is almost, it's like broken down into, there's 3 categories. And Aaron earlier actually had a slide that mentioned some details on like these 3 categories. It's democratic, where it's like 1 person per vote, plutocratic, where it's 1 coin per vote, and then meritocratic, where it's a reputation point per vote. And I think within each of these categories, it might be helpful to view it through 3 different lenses, from a perspective of identity, reputation, and then technical systems design. And this would include like quadratic voting systems, for instance, as one of those lines of thought. And then within each of these lenses per these 3 categories, we can break down the security measures and the different attack vectors that bad actors could pursue, and the defense mechanisms for each that we can at least document with precedent research. And then going into the future, where systems like, for instance, with 1 person per vote, you get into forms of identity verification. This starts simply at, as mentioned earlier, Kenric, like you talked about the Zoom calls that were going on with Circle, all the way up to the spectrum to like deeper forms of KYC auth per se. And with plutocratic, you have this 1 coin, 1 vote. There are many ways to game a system like this, and we can document this from a technical perspective, but also through the lens of reputation and identity. We can get into the issuer holder model through Hyperledger Aries and then Prism. And then when it comes to meritocratic, how do you game a reputation system? We can talk about attack vectors for different SSI paradigms. That includes the reputation and verifiability of issuers themselves. And how do you defend against basically bad actors becoming issuers in a kind of a complex attack vector on this side? So I think on these kind of 3 topics, through these 3 lenses, we could provide some meaningful research and ideas. And 2 to 5 pages will be a challenge. So we'll, we'll condense our most impactful thoughts into 2 to 5 pages, if that is the goal here, the scope.
Yeah, I think that's best for this white paper, given how it has to fit into the others. But then again, for each of you, this can be a launching point for an independent white paper that expands upon what you're discussing here.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, just to supplement what Kenric just said, I mean, I think, yeah, there could be a further reading, further detail. I think part of what we're doing here in a way is also governance, because this is part of the community governance oversight proposal. This is like a proof of concept that people from different parts of the community can work together on this. And well, hopefully we can. It looks like we can. It's very interesting material. So it'd be like a taster, and hopefully we can then feed that into a kind of a town hall presentation or something and just say, look, this is what we've done. This is what we've covered. And also that could be like a showcase for collaboration and a showcase for each of our individual contributions as well.
Yeah, and I'll hand it back to Stephen to close the recorded part of the meeting. Is there any other agenda items we needed to go through?
Yeah, thanks for wrapping up. If there's any conclusions, Kenric, but then I can just go on to any other business. Yeah, I just want to say, in case there was any snafus with the project planning, everyone received their calendar invites all right, the Zoom and the Google invites and the agenda links. If they've all worked correctly, then that's okay. If there's any technical problems, email me or Kenric, and we are set up a Zoom, a bi-weekly invite every 2 weeks for this time until the end of September. There was an after town hall you were planning, Kenric. Would you like to talk about that briefly?
Yeah, I don't know the timing of that yet, but I want to do one fairly soon in order to have the community be aware of what we're doing and to start recruiting reviewers of the work. But it's a busy month too, so that'll end up being sometime in July at this point.
Okay, and that is the end of the meeting, and thank you everyone for your participation in the recorded portion of the meeting. Now we're going to stop the recording.